Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city. Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city. And we start. Friday evening settled over the coastal suburb of Maple Harbor like a soft but heavy blanket. The warm scent of jasmine hung in the April air, mixed with distant highway fumes the almost imperceptible rustle of the big world beyond the fence of the well-kept Weller family home. Thomas stood at the kitchen island, assembling a makeshift cheese and meat plate on a massive oak board. Small single-colored cubes of Gruyere were placed in a strict row. Nearby, a silver knife was tearing open thin, spicy slices of prosciutto. There was that special silence in the house that only happens between work and dinner. Everything seemed calm, but impatience lurked within the walls. The front door creaked quietly, as if someone was checking how far the sound was traveling. Thomas straightened his shoulders mechanically. The service had faded, but his reflexes remained. He didn't go to meet her, he wanted to give Karen a chance to enter as a guest, and not as an interrogation subject. It's still Friday, it's still the wife, it's still home comfort. A heavy suitcase touched the threshold. The ribs of the wheel frame clinked against a copper plate. "Don't worry, Tom." Karen's voice sounded smooth, harmless, as if from an advertising video about faithful partners in a family mortgage. "I can handle it." "I didn't even think about interfering," he answered and looked up. Karen was already taking off her tight cashmere coat. The autumn shade of tobacco emphasized the trembling tan of business trips. Her movements were precise, like a surgeon's before an incision. The pale strip of skin on the ring finger, where the wedding ring usually glittered, was momentarily caught in the light of the chandelier, but then disappeared into the shadows. Thomas noted this silently. The old officer is always the first to notice empty holsters. Karen tossed a strand of ashen hair over her shoulder and inhaled the smell of the kitchen. "Cheese?" she asked with approval. "Do you want to drink California, or are you opening your favorite bourbon again?" First for her, he nodded upstairs, where the music was muffled, then for us. He promised to give Emma 13 minutes of freedom and then seat her at the table. Karen smiled at the corners of her lips, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Is 13 enough for a young princess to put on her beauty before the next ball? She's not going to the ball, she's... He hesitated, searching for the word, "to a meeting." "Just meeting you." Karen took off her pumps and stepped silently into the warm teak floor. Evening meetings at 23 usually smell like cheap motels. But you're right, let's hope for the best. Thomas put the knife down and straightened up. Over 10 years of teaching, he taught hundreds of young men the art of keeping their backs straight. Now the same discipline was useful in order not to flinch. "Don't start," he said softly. "We promised to trust her." "It's hard to trust when you know the statistics of evening traffic accidents," Karen noted, and, as if remembering the rules of decency, she touched his shoulder with her palm. "Sorry, I'm tired. One flight, 3 presentations, and an eternal buffet of mini croissants." The touch sent a current through Thomas's arm, not gentle, but rather alarmingly electrostatic. He suddenly remembered. 5 years ago, upon her return, she hung around his neck, laughing, sniffing the fresh smoke of his jacket. Now restrained professional politeness. A buffer zone opened up exactly between them, where the giant lawyers drew the front line. On the second floor, Emma stood in front of the mirror in her room. The long evening light broke on her shoulders with golden watercolors. The dress, turquoise, barely above the knee, seemed to breathe with her. She stroked the fabric with her palms, as if checking whether it was too provocative. A message flashed on the phone. "At 15, I'm already on my way. Jay." A smile itself stretched her cheeks. "It's going to be hell here," she typed back. "But I swear we will survive." Having sent it, she turned her head to the photograph on the dresser, her and her father on a fishing trip 4 years ago. Thomas holds her by the shoulders like a life preserver. There was a quiet knock on the door. "Yes?" Karen opened the door slightly, without any special authority, but with her mother's experience. "Can..." She looked in and gave her daughter the signature corporate smile that was used to sign contracts worth millions. Of course, Mom. Emma hid the phone under her compact cosmetic bag. You look wonderful, Karen said, looking at the dress. Turquoise is a bold choice. Thank you. The girl again felt like a 10-year-old whose homework was being checked. Jack loves bright colors. Jack, Karen seemed to be tasting the name. Paramedic, huh? Paramedic, Emma corrected. He's in Rescue 17. Karen nodded, still standing in the doorway. Traffic lights for rescuers. Sounds noble. What are your ambitions? A nursing diploma? Then maybe he'll go back to university. Paramedics are rare. So there are plans. Fine. She took a step back. Father is waiting. Try to get down before the cheese turns yellow. Emma closed the door and held her breath. For a second, she wanted to shout, Mom, at least ask how my exams went. But she just straightened the line of eyeliner on her upper eyelid and smiled again at her reflection, half a girl, half a woman, whom no one wanted to let go. Downstairs, Thomas and Karen were already pouring wine. The ruby ribbon shimmered in the glass like a small red sea between two continents. When did you arrive? Thomas tried to ask a neutral question, but his voice was dry. An hour ago. With a connection in Atlanta, Karen answered and finished the water in one gulp. Disgustingly cramped flight. The 22nd row smelled of other people's caffeine and fear. Thomas grinned and moved the tall crystal leg towards her. Wine will wash away all fear. I doubt it, Karen said, but she still took a sip. Tom, let's go without patrol today. I need an evening of rest without pseudo-interrogations. And I don't ask questions. He shrugged. At least one evening. Let's pretend. He searched for the right word, normal. Karen put down her glass and crossed her arms, hugging herself as if from the cold. Normal? Is it when the husband doesn't look at his wife's phone every Friday? Thomas's heart twitched like a bastard hoe in gravel. He lowered his eyes to his palm, the muscles jumped with restrained anger. I didn't. He coughed. I was checking the flight time. No more. There's always no more, Karen said with a grin. But let's not. Emma is about to come down. He nodded, but didn't look up. In the depths of my soul, like a lingering pain in a scar, the thought was beating. A telephone would explain a lot. And almost simultaneously another. If you touch it, everything will collapse. The stairs groaned quietly. Emma appeared like a firefly in the twilight. Thomas saw the dress for the first time, and his palm trembled slightly, inadvertently crushing a grape. Wow, baby, he exhaled. It's time for you to go to Hollywood, and not just to our poor center. Dad, Emma laughed, don't embarrass me. Karen turned, assessing, and suddenly a brief respect flashed in her gaze, perhaps for her daughter's confidence or her ability to be herself. Amazing, she said. Come to us. Emma sat on a high bar stool, her legs swaying as if she was a child again. Thomas placed a non-alcoholic glass of sparkling water and a thin slice of lemon in front of her. I can have wine, she giggled. Water is better for your vocal cords, Thomas joked. Suddenly you have to shout, Jack, stop. We're late. There was general laughter, even Karen relaxed. Her lips stretched almost sincerely. However, in the shadows of the cabinets, where the lamp did not reach, the ghosts of the unsaid trembled. How was your last exam? Karen asked unexpectedly. Emma blinked. Do you remember? She burst out. Of course. Karen nervously adjusted the bracelet on her wrist. Pharmacogenomics, right? Yes, and I passed with an A. Emma straightened her shoulders as if she had just been knighted. Congratulations. Karen touched her palm. Really, I'm proud. At that moment, however, Karen's phone began to play, vibrating on the marble countertop. The screen flashed with an incoming message. Wonderful report. I'm looking forward to the continuation. D. The letter D flashed like a red rag to a bull and disappeared. Of all those present, only Thomas managed to notice. Too quickly, but the military's eyes are accustomed to catching details, flashes, signals, sights. My heart pushed against my ribs again. He forced himself to smile and carry on an unremarkable family conversation. Tell me where you and Jack are having dinner. Hopefully not at Brush and Fork after their burger. Your heart rate will be 180. Don't worry, she winked. He found a small place by the pier. Scallop fish, live music. Everything is nice. Music. Thomas thought about it. We need to ask who is playing today. Suddenly, there will be Blue Ribbon, I served with their bass player. Emma waved her hands. Dad, no, nobody wants. She hesitated, catching his stern gaze. That is, I adore your friends, but let's not make a scene. Thomas raised his palms in surrender. Karen laughed quietly. The laughter sounded sparkling, but then her gaze fell on her own phone, and the laughter faded. The doorbell rang. The ringing was soft, as if someone had deliberately turned down the volume. Thomas felt a thin spring stretching inside him. Emma jumped out of her chair, the hem of her dress flying up. It's Jack. She rushed towards the corridor. Let me open it myself, Thomas said too quickly, but his daughter was already running. His boots followed. Karen stayed, raised her glass, took a sip, and closed her eyes. Her eyelids fluttered as if she was drinking heavy medicine. In the hallway, tall Jack Holt stood with a small box wrapped in craft paper. Pale blonde hair, cut short, backlit in watercolor by a street lamp. The blue eyes smiled, but somewhere in the corners there was a shadow of fatigue jumping. Good evening, sir. He extended his hand to Thomas. Jack Holt. Sir, it's a pleasure to meet you formally. I heard about you, Holt. Thomas shook hands firmly, carefully. Come in. Jack took off his light jacket and handed the box to Emma. Mini cake, gluten-free. Suddenly Dad has strict regulations. Thomas chuckled. At the front, no one was interested in gluten, but it's nice. Emma laughed as she touched Jack's forearm. Dad, you're not at the front. Let us go. We'll be back by 11, honestly. By 11:30, Thomas corrected her. Curfew. Jack nodded. Agreed. Do me a favor, Thomas added a little more quietly, and don't speed on Highway 26B. There's a new radar. Come on, sir. There was no mockery in his answer, only respect, perhaps a little too much. The men exchanged a quick glance that said, I know you're hiding something, but I don't have proof right now. Emma pulled Jack by the hand towards the door, as if she was afraid of unnecessary interrogation. Before leaving, she looked into the living room. Mom, until 11:30. Take your time, Karen answered evenly. Enjoy the evening. Just. Her voice trembled. Be careful. Emma smiled gratefully. The door closed, leaving two people and a half-drunk Glass inside the house. A minute later, the living room became quiet again. Thomas took off his jacket and carefully hung it on the back of the chair. Karen came down with a glass, standing opposite him. They seem happy, she said into space. It seems, he responded. At the same age, you already commanded a platoon. She bowed her head. Aren't you being too strict with her? Perhaps. He poured himself some bourbon. The liquid slid like molten amber. But rigor is my form of caring. Karen walked to the window. From the street came the distant rumble of an engine, not Jack, but rather a neighbor who was an old Mustang enthusiast. The moon had not yet risen, but the sky was already filled with metallic light. Someday you should stop giving orders. Her voice weakened. You always say that trust is the basis of any operation. He finished his drink and put the glass down. I came closer. A fragile distance stood between them again, stretched like a live wire. Only operations have a clear plan. Thomas looked at her profile, stern, as if carved. People have hiding places. Karen didn't answer. Far away, a new signal flashed on her phone, but the sound was muted. Thomas saw the light of the screen reflected in the glass of the window. I couldn't see the text itself, but the color of the notification was the same green as a minute ago. Karen, he began softly, and then I heard my own voice tremble. When soldiers lie, units die. When they lie, he paused, hearing his heart beating as if in someone else's chest. Family. She turned around slowly. Cold steel lit up in her eyes. Tom, today is Friday. Let me catch my breath. Can we talk tomorrow? He heard, postpone the war. And I heard something else. If you dare, I'll shoot too. Thomas swallowed. The wind outside the window touched the wooden frames. Okay, he said, tomorrow. Karen walked past, lightly touching his shoulder as if putting a period or a farewell comma. The door slammed in the bedroom, not loudly, but like a calculated explosion, and the house fell silent. Thomas was left alone with a cheese plate and 2 glasses. He picked one up, left the other untouched tiny mid-table diplomacy. Behind the glass, a pair of headlights blinked in the darkness. Emma and Jack's car was disappearing around the corner. Thomas took a breath, as he did before a practice shot, and lowered the curtain. From the outside, the suburb seemed warm and friendly. Inside the Weller house, there was a quiet countdown to the first loud sound. Left alone, Thomas and Karen first talked about trifles. The wine flowed viscously down the sides of the glasses, the cheese plate became empty. Slices of prosciutto turned into edge curls, Gruyere crumbled like limestone in the hot sun. The conversation flowed easily about the new course on small unit tactics that Thomas was teaching to the cadets, about the Paris pharmaceutical exhibition, where Karen fought off clumsy French distributors. At first, it seemed that the warm home light smoothed out the rough edges. Even the heavy air cushion of mistrust stuck between them seemed to rise just above their heads. Imagine, Karen laughed. They tried to convince me that their allergy spray was revolutionary, but in fact, they simply replaced the flavoring. Revolution is the smell of gunpowder, Thomas winked, pouring her another drink. Everything else is marketing. She smiled, and for a moment the corners of her eyes came alive with girlish sparkles, as he had seen them 25 years ago. Thomas felt a strange catch. Tenderness appeared suddenly, like a lantern on a dark street, brightly, and then hid again. But he allowed himself to relax. The capsule of comfort was thin, but you could breathe in it. The hidden pendulum of the clock on the wall seemed to be speeding up. It was releasing seconds like drops from an inverted flask. In their conversations, both memories and disappointments were made known, but both walked carefully around the mines. Thomas found himself looking at Karen's hands, the slender fingers, the graceful network of veins, the golden sheen of the varnish. How many times has he rolled these palms on his own, begging and soothing? Now he studied them as if they were photographs of a suspect, and yet the warmth of their touch was real. It did not go away. Suddenly, the front door slammed, lightly, almost joyfully. It smells like wine. Emma's voice came from the corridor. The ringing echo of shoes knocked on the wood, followed by laughter. A second before his daughter entered the living room, Thomas noticed the time on the microwave. 10:59 p.m. punctuality worthy of a duty sergeant. He grinned. His curfew had worked. "We're still here," he said when Emma flew into the room, crimson after the cool coastal wind. "How did it go?" "Super. Grilled scallop is divine. Live music, tiny bar," she blurted out, throwing her purse on the couch. "Jack says hi. He even wanted to drop by, but I convinced him. Dad will interrogate until dawn." So he rushed off to his shift. Karen laughed, pure and short. She was clearly pleased. Dinner with her husband turned out to be something almost harmless. "Give me your jacket, soldier," Thomas said, holding out his hands to his daughter. "Aired with salt and sea wind, which means it needs to be beaten." Emma turned, handing the phone to her mother. "Mom, I think yours was vibrating. It fell into my bag as we were heading to the car. Sorry. Is it true?" Karen raised her eyebrow in surprise. "I didn't notice." She rummaged in her jacket pocket and felt for her device dark, thin, with a graphite lid. Thomas involuntarily tensed. Their phones were almost identical. He remembered that Karen had previously been scrolling through the news about lung vaccines. Emma handed over her father's other, alien gadget. "Dad, I think this is yours. I put it in the wrong place." Thomas automatically picked up the phone. A notification flashed on the screen. The white rectangle of the SMS froze in the center like a flare shot. "Kitten, you were great. Thanks for the hot night. I love business trips like this. Not him. He knew every estimate on his contact list. And in that same split second, I realized the phone Karen. She hastily took out hers, but did not notice that it was silently lying inside her daughter's purse. Thomas, clenching his fingers, felt the edges of the body cutting into his palm smooth, cold like a blade. Something slammed inside. No anger, no storm deafening, wide silence. It sounded like an artillery strike, but the eardrums had already closed. His face remained stony. The skin around the eyes tightened slightly, but the bangs fell and hid this movement. "Thank you, Em," he said hoarsely. His voice did not betray the trembling. "There must be a notice from the bank." Karen simultaneously reached for a glass of water without looking in his direction, but could she? Judging by the carelessness of the gesture, she did not even notice that the device was in her husband's hands and not in hers. Emma didn't care. The nostrils languidly inhaled the aroma of cheese. The girl suddenly felt hungry and grabbed a fork. "God, I thought I wouldn't eat another crumb," she muttered, "but this Camembert is calling my name." Thomas smiled, but his breath concentrated somewhere in his collar. He turned his back to them under the pretext, "I'll put the phone on charge. I'm almost sitting down." 2 steps, and he's on the kitchen counter. The screen went dark. The message was hidden like a rat in a hole. Everything inside him demanded to bark, to knock over the wine, to break something on the marble, forcing her to explain here and now. But the officer in him responded with the command, "Resist. Watch. Find out." At the table, Emma told her mother how the waitress spilled sauce on Jack, and he, laughing, threw his apron over his shoulders. Karen, listening intently, smiled and sipped water. Thomas now saw a hidden side in every nod. "Whose shoulders did you cover with an apron a week ago?" He sat down and poured himself some bourbon. The edge of the glass trembled so little that it could be attributed to tired hands. "Are you tired, Dad?" Emma immediately caught the weakness. "He's been waiting for us for a long time." "It's okay, kitten," he answered, and he himself noticed how the word kitten flashed with someone else's intonation. My heart sank, loathing myself. Don't let the wave expose. The clock struck 11. Karen raised an eyebrow. "It seems we exceeded the limit by 28 minutes. Will curfew violators be punished?" "Already pardoned," Thomas muttered. "The headquarters is closed today." He found himself avoiding looking her straight in the eyes. His gaze slid over her cheek, over her hair, over the shiny glass in her hand, but as soon as he could outline a trajectory towards the pupils, he turned away. "If I look in, I'll scream, or she will see that I understand everything." "Dad, I'm really tired," Emma yawned. "Can I sneak away?" Thomas nodded, touching her elbow. "Go. 2 magnesium tablets and go to bed. Tomorrow you will tell me more." The daughter kissed him on the cheek and whispered, "You are the best." He almost didn't hear the words. He felt his sweaty, icy breath through his skin. Emma glanced at her mother. "Don't work at night, Mom. You yourself spoke about hormonal balance." "I won't," Karen smiled encouragingly. "I only have the report in drafts." Emma walked away, her heels clattering down the steps. Their echoes disappeared into the corridor, and the house was empty again. There are 2 left. The same table, the same glasses, and a crack, thinner than a hair, but sharp like a splinter. Thomas collected the plates and went to the sink. Karen stood behind her and scraped the bread crumbs off the table with her fingers. "Tom," she said after a moment of silence, "thanks for the evening. I missed you without these normal conversations." He politely raised his chin. He seemed to be listening, but his thoughts were racing. "Hot night. I love business trips." Every word cut on my nerves. However, his face remained neutral, even slightly smiling. "I'm glad it worked out," he said. The water gurgled and the ceramics clinked as he placed the plates in the machine. Karen slowly poured the remaining water over the candle and the wick hissed. "Did something happen?" she suddenly asked quietly. Thomas turned. Her eyes finally caught up with him. Cold gray, tired, but attentive. And at that moment he felt his whole body calling, "Now, speak." But the fear of destroying her daughter destroying the remains of herself, crushed this impulse. Nothing. He smiled out of the corner of his mouth. I was just thinking about the lecture course. The fourth company again failed to fire. Karen nodded as if she believed it. Or she pretended to. She looked at her phone lying on the edge of the sofa. She touched the screen briefly. Thomas caught on. It was a quick, checking gesture. And a slight shadow. Did she notice the missing message? Or is he looking to see if he forgot his own? "I'll go to bed," Karen said, and took the device, lightly holding it in her palm like a valuable hairpin. "See you in the morning?" "Certainly." She passed by. The smell of her perfume light, powdery, washed over him. It smelled of lilac and something sharp, almost metallic. Thomas almost held his breath as the footsteps faded down the hallway and the bedroom door clicked shut. He remained among the demi-monde. The clock was ticking. The cold seeped out of the glass door onto the patio. Thomas sank into a chair, clasping his hands. For the first time in many years, an absolute emptiness arose in my head, not a place for memories, not a springboard for strategies, but a black vacuum. He took a small notebook from his pocket. He always carried it as a ritual. I opened it to a blank page, but the line was not written. "Was your hand shaking?" No. It was the soul itself that pounded the cage with its fist. "Hot night." The words hung like bold red marks in my brain. He licked his lips and smiled bitterly. Damn the romantic lovers who write such banal SMS. He had two options, shoot or wait. Military experience whispered, wait, collect data, find out the enemy's route, then strike in the heart. But the man inside was torn. Scream, break her, challenge her to a revelation. Thomas got up and went to the closet, where on the middle shelf lay his old army tablet cleverly camouflaged with academy documents. He took out a small voice recorder from under the lid, checked the battery, and put it on the table. A dull metallic sound echoed the emptiness of the room. To hell with her honor. I need the truth. He walked around the house again, turned off the light in the hallway, dimmed the lamp by the sofa. He silently climbed the stairs and looked into Emma's room. She was sleeping, curled up like a cat, her eyelashes trembling in her sleep. Thomas closed the door and grabbed the railing. His fingers turned white. In my own bedroom, only the nightlight was on. Karen lay sideways. Her breathing was even. The phone is nearby, face down. Thomas sat down on a chair near the window, pretending to read a book. In fact, he was watching the edge of her curl swaying on the sheet. Was she sleeping, or was she pretending? The minutes stretched on. The slight creaking of wood, the click of a distant thermostat, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, everything sounded too loud. Stranger in my bed, thought Thomas, and felt ice mold growing under his ribs. But he didn't show it. A form of forced balance turned into a feat. Time dragged on to midnight when he finally got up and put down the book without saying a word. He took off his shirt, turned off the nightlight, and lay down. Karen's body radiates warmth through the mattress, and his own turned to stone. There is no more than 10 centimeters between them, and at the same time an abyss that not a single bridge of engineering troops would be able to cover. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. The text of the message appeared in my imagination. A white rectangle on a black background burned into my forehead like a brand. Every breath Karen took was in his ear. Exhale, pause, inhale like a metronome of infidelity. In a few hours, it will begin to get light. At dawn, he always got up to run a habit. Today, he will run out especially early, and every mile of highway will become a question. What's next, Captain Weller? Offensive or covert reconnaissance? The answer has not yet been born, but from that moment on, everything, even the warm breath of his wife, became data for a future operation, and Thomas, as taught, began monitoring. Thus ended the evening, which was supposed to return warmth to the family. It only opened the abyss quietly, without an explosion, but with such a ringing sound that its echo would walk around the Weller house for a long time, testing the strength of the walls. The morning began so ordinarily that even a blind cat would not have believed this very ordinary thing. It seemed fake. Karen went down to the kitchen already in a business suit, absent-mindedly scrolled through the news on her tablet and still touched her husband's shoulder as if he were a simple household item, a warm umbrella stand. Thomas nodded to her as smoothly as he had greeted cadets in formation for years. At that moment, both masks worked almost perfectly. However, Thomas breathed ice inside. Under the down jacket of formal courtesy, steel plates were visible, the fastenings of a new, secret task. The first step was silent. On the wall of Thomas's office to the left of the shelves with regulations hung an old diagram of intercepting a moving target from his course work. Radii, dead zones, visual control angles. He took off the sheet, laid it out on the table, and pinned a fresh map of Maple Harbor on top. Red pins marked Karen's home, her pharmacy office, and the nearest chain hotel where she often stayed between flights. The blue ones are her jogging routes after work. Yellow points where the CCTV camera could have unobtrusively assisted Officer Weller. It was here, in a quiet office, that the first combat word order was spoken. Observation. Since the time of design workshops, the college's storerooms have contained discarded but serviceable mini-sound recorders with a long battery life. Thomas took two, one with a suction cup bearing, the other an older one, the size of a flash drive. He fitted them with fresh batteries and checked the noise threshold. The mechanical click of the microphone plates established him as a field engineer. The heart rate monitor on his wristwatch crossed the number 58 as Thomas sat in the garage at his workbench, taking apart Karen's backup phone. The cloning device took an image of the SIM card, and a free utility on the laptop carefully planted a copy of the Messenger account on a protected virtual machine. No evil hacking, just the good old device plus access seconds rule. Getting the seconds itself turned out to be easier than he feared. Karen left her bag in the living room and went to the shower. The sound of the water gave a full 85 seconds. This would be enough for a saboteur to unscrew the fuse and for Thomas to move the digital twin of the SIM card into his Mink. Now everyone who entered her number sent a secret copy. Push notifications popped up on her laptop. So far, just the work routine. Have we approved the samples in Portland? Please send a presentation for the Brazilians. Karen behaved impeccably evenly, but Thomas was not deceived. Lovers rarely chat about forbidden things in the middle of a weekday morning. Equipment for external surveillance required money. Thomas did not want to leave a digital trace on family accounts, so he took out a wad of cash from the safe against the wall. That stash was born in Afghanistan, a black fund in case of evacuation of cadets. 2,000 in slightly worn $100 bills fell into the pocket of his leather jacket. At the Radio Shack on Extinction, as the locals called the shabby highway store, he bought a pair of stand-alone button cameras with an LTE module, a thin GPS tracker, and a tiny hub that disguises the data stream as stream radio traffic. The old salesman just nodded, looking at him as just another fan of independent video surveillance of teenage children. The smile in response turned out to be the same as Thomas had once given to Afghan traders when he bought decryption software from them. Respectful, but almost empty. Tuesday, 5:42, Twilight Garage. Thomas carefully placed the GPS tag under the bumper of Karen's Lexus. The movement took 15 seconds. The sky over the suburbs became soft, as if mascara had been diluted with water. He returned to the house a moment before Karen took out the keys. The wife kissed her husband as usual, and, not noticing anything unnecessary, left. The first coordinates appeared on the laptop. First to the office. Then a sudden detour towards a coffee bar on the edge of the city where her path did not usually lead. Thomas noted the stop, 34 minutes inside. The black icon on the map froze where the small business hotel, the Lakeview, was located. He caught himself with green envy of the cold numbers. They didn't have to do anything. The sky at home was covered with rain when Thomas turned on the audio recorder, hidden in the back pocket of Karen's jacket that morning. On the ear are skinny earbuds. Through the rustling of fabric, the voice of an unknown man cut like diamonds. "So you're flying to Houston on Thursday?" "Yes, but only if I work it out with Tom." "Volume, the same. Retired lieutenant, right?" "Already a major." Doesn't matter. Discreet like a safe. But sometimes, sometimes I feel like he's breathing down my neck, even across the ocean. Pause. Muffled snoring, almost like a kiss. Thomas swallowed. His throat was as dry as in the desert. You know, the male voice again, I can buy us a night in Houston. 2 days, if you want. Let's see. Click. The conversation ended. With each new entry, each screenshot of the chat window, Thomas managed to push away from his own abyss only with the help routine. He built an ideal military intelligence cycle. Collection, GPS logs, phone wiretapping, parking video. Fixation, rename files by UTC, encrypt archive, copy to college cloud container. Analysis, mark coincidences of places, time intervals, and most importantly, repetitive rituals. In 10 days, he saw a picture. Every Tuesday and Friday, coffee bar Lakeview office. On Wednesday, and sometimes on Sunday, a late call from the number D, Rowley. Conversations last only 4 minutes, but then Karen sleeps deeply without the usual tossing and turning. Chemistry relationship is visible even under the blanket. On Friday evening, Thomas brought home a huge box for a course layout. Inside is a small panel with a hidden 4K camera and a condenser microphone. He installed it behind the decorative ventilation grill in the living room, right under the lamp. The viewing angle covered the sofa and table, the epicenter of family gatherings. The buffer file was sent directly to a private cloud address. The threat of exposure burned like a lonely fire. As soon as Karen noticed an extra diode, the game was over. But it seemed to Thomas that the real risk was not knowing anything. Night, 3:18. There is no moon. The streetlights in the alley float in dim spots. Thomas sits in his car, a block from the Lakeview Hotel. Under your fingers is a tablet with a line camera, broadcasting silhouettes from room 214, a man and a woman at the window. No details, just thermal contours. You can't make out their faces, but you can see them kissing. The Ford's interior is filled with the hum of a fan. Thomas feels his temples tugging, how the skin under his t-shirt is covered with sweat, as if someone is heating the air. He presses rec, the file goes to the cloud. Enough, he tells himself. But the car continues to sit until the hotel windows light up one after another, betraying someone else's nightly habits. By the middle of the month, the dossier had thickened. 42 audio clips, a 137-page transcript, photographs of license plates, a receipt from a bar signed K, Weller D, Rowley. Rows of dates, coordinates, and lines. Everything was stored under a password on a hard drive in the safe of the locker where the commemorative medals used to rest. But not a single medallion with a golden eagle weighed as much as this folder now weighed. One evening, Karen asked casually, "You started staying late after lectures. Additional projects?" Thomas met her gaze for a second and saw she was looking for a crack, but he just shrugged. Cadets require more practice. The phone generation is weak. The move is mirror-like. She has her secrets. It has a parallel front. There was a pack of tomatoes on the kitchen board. Thomas cut them into perfectly equal slices. The tip of the knife slid through the pulp easily, like butter. He watched the red juice flow down and thought, have I cut enough slices to put together a complete picture? No. The present time of exploration is confirmation, and for confirmation, one more, most risky step is needed, making contact with the target, Rowley. But for now, step by step. The silence in the house in the evening became different. Thomas no longer heard peace in her. He heard in it radio, in which you need to catch the enemy frequency. An hour before dawn, Thomas returned from an early run. Karen's travel bag was already packed in the hallway. The tag showed a flight to Houston that same day. She planned to go out quietly while the family slept, as always. Thomas lifted the bag, feeling the patches of the luggage, the plastic port for the step tracker, the double bottom. He did not open it. Unlike a telephone, there would be no way to hide the fingerprints here. He simply attached a tiny RFID tag to the bottom, set to emit through metal, to know if she would meet D at the airport. Muffled steps on the stairs, a slight rustling of clothes. Karen came down. Not seeing her husband in the darkness, she grabbed the handle of her bag. But Thomas came around the corner. "I'll give you a lift," he offered evenly. "Oh, don't. I have a corporate taxi. Morning traffic is hell. I'm still going out of town to the shooting range. I'm on my way." Karen paused. Her eyes slid over his face as if checking the terrain for hidden mines. But he smiled softly. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, thank you." The road to the airport was lined with a pink dawn. Karen looked over the bridge platform. Thomas looked at the speedometer and road stripes. The radio whispered jazz. At one point, she said, "You've changed, Tom." Her voice was quiet, as if she was afraid to disturb her own echo. "I'm getting old," he answered. "Not about that. You seem to have two faces." He nodded. "That's what they teach in the army. One is for the parade ground. The second is for night raids." In the rearview mirror, he saw her lips, a thin line without lipstick. "And the third?" she asked. "We put on the third," he said, touching the turn with his indicator, "when we go to a war that no one should know about." Karen looked at him, but her eyes immediately slid out the window. They both realized that they had said too much and too little. In the terminal, he leaned over and touched her shoulder. "Have a good flight." "Thank you, Tom," she said. He watched her move away, merge with the flow of suits and suitcases. His phone buzzed in his bosom as an RFID tag went live, confirming that the bag was heading toward the security zone. He didn't know if she would turn around at the last moment to smile. She didn't turn around. As the glass doors slid open, cutting her off from him, Thomas exhaled. The inhaled air burned no worse than gunpowder. The first clue came from Karen's work badge, forgotten in the laundry basket. On the back is a barcode for access to Alliance Hotel's partner hotels. Thomas picked it up in the mobile application of the loyalty program. The booking history menu popped up. Half of Karen's overnight stays were spent on the corporation's account, the other half on the card account of a certain HealthPro Consulting LLC. Different states, but one contact email, d.rowley@healthpro-c.com. Thomas pulled up a spreadsheet, and the booking dates were for Coffee Bar Lakeview on Tuesdays and Fridays. And in the notes to the accounts, there were notes Q3 Strategy, KW, and Doctor only. This was no longer accidental chemistry, but a regular strategic partnership and, perhaps, a laundering groove. He raised the phone to his ear and dialed an old colleague, Vince Marconi, who had moved to the financial cybersecurity department after his discharge. "We need a quiet background check," Thomas said. "Name David Rowley, 4546, Pharmaceutical Development. Can you?" "If he's not a saint, I'll find the holes," Marconi promised. "Give it a day." Putting down the phone, Thomas straightened his shoulders, day his new distance. In the evening, the first letter arrived from Vince. Rowley, David A. In 2013, he was fired from Biosphere Med after an internal audit. Conflict of interest. 3 flag payments to a HealthPro consulting consultant in Panama City. Open visa to Macau, frequent border crossings with Hong Kong. Attached to the letter were 3 PDF statements from bank tracers, amounts of $180,000 each, withdrawals through crypto wallets, and the recipient was the same fund that paid for Karen's hotels. Thomas's throat was dry. Corporate romance already smelled like a payoff for something more serious. The next link was the fitness center club card that Karen carried on her keys, Staminaco Executive Gym. In the visit database, Thomas found guest lists. Every Wednesday morning, Rowley, guest Karen Weller. And on the same dates, advertising expenses for Uberblack from the office to the same hall were debited from the corporate wallet. Legal traffic for an illegal date is a classic of the spy landscape. While Vince dug deeper, Thomas switched to Jackson Holt. The son-in-law in projection figures seemed honest, but details began to fall out like loose screws. MP Certificate of Completion was listed as issued in Maricopa County, Arizona. However, his license was not listed on the state's official website. In the Rescue 17 dossier, Jack was listed as a volunteer paramedic. The act was signed by the captain of the unit, 2 weeks before Jack joined the staff. According to the DMV, the license plate of his old pickup truck was registered to Clearidge Logistics. The same company appeared in D reports on the transportation of fentanyl lost in 2022. Thomas paused, allowing the information to cool. Coincidences rarely work out so beautifully on their own. On Friday morning, Karen returned from a business trip. Her suitcase smelled like the wet bleach of hotel linen. Thomas greeted her with a smile and prepared an omelet. The frying pan hissed, the sound covered the silence. "How is the board of directors?" he asked, serving coffee. "It's boring as always," she answered without looking up. At the same second, he received a GPS signal on his phone. Lakeview Hotel, room 402, checkout 5:08. That is, 6 hours ago. The board of directors had to take place 1,500 miles away. Lies cut out new holes for themselves, but always forget to mend the old ones, Thomas thought, watching her run her nail along the lid of the cup. At noon, Vince sent a second helping. The body of the letter contained only 2 sentences. David Rowley is not just a consultant. He proxy registrar supply of experimental immunomodulators bypassing the FDA through compassionate patient schemes. Several hospitals lost millions on unaccounted-for shipments. Attached to the letter is a JPG file, a surveillance camera image from the Houston airport. Rowley goes to the VIP room, with Karen next to him. She is wearing the same gray jacket in which she had lunch with the directors' committee. Thomas peered at their silhouettes. There was no touching between them, pure business distance. But he already knew the value of this mask. In the evening, Thomas called Jack with a simple SMS. "Need help at the shooting range. 19 o'clock. Instructor's discount on ammunition." The young man showed up with Joy Extra training before the next night shift. At the range, Thomas gave him an R-15 carbine and led him along target lanes, silently assigning tasks. Jack shot well, but once or twice the gun jerked to the right, a clear sign of premature fear of recoil. "What's wrong with your hand?" Thomas asked while changing stores. "Nothing, sir. Old microtrauma." "Did you serve?" "No. Playground. Bad fall." Thomas checked his left forearm. An old, nearly healed scar, 5 centimeters long, looked more like a crimson metal burn than a sports fall. But he didn't say anything. An hour later, they were drinking Cokes in the back of Jack's pickup. Thomas asked about shifts, about earnings, about plans to become a doctor. Jack answered confidently, but in every second sentence he referred to some supervisor of the grant program. The curator never mentioned his name. "You know," Thomas said softly, "grants love transparency. Easy to get, hard to hide." Jack grinned and took a bite of the bar. "I have nothing to hide, sir." However, when he drove away, Thomas took a photo of the pickup truck's license plate, RQ 16271. In the evening, I dialed that number into the search terminal of the D database and saw the marker, "Surveillance removed, case closed." Closed because the owner company was liquidated 3 months ago. The night lingered outside the windows, and in the Weller house, the pump server vibrated dully, unloading new audio packets. Thomas sat with headphones. In one ear, the quiet conversations of Karen and Rowley, in the other his own breathing, slow, as if underwater. The picture was shrinking, a pharmaceutical company with gray schemes, Rowley as a liaison, Karen as either a pawn or a partner. Her business trips coincided with compassionate deliveries. And on the sidelines is Jack Holt, propping up Emma's life with tales of medical heroism, but tied to the logisticians who lost the fentanyl. Thomas marked 4 large red circles on the board: Rowley, Health Pro, Clearidge, Houston Party. Arrows connected the names. In the center of the circle is the name Karen, below is Emma. He stepped back and looked at the diagram. The pattern of lines looked like a network of wasps in a tree branch. Wherever you step, the sting will surely find flesh. While the hard drive was making noise, Thomas turned off the light, leaving one table lamp on. The yellow cone contained the Evidence R folder. He locked her in the safe and leaned his forehead against the cold steel of the door. "This is not war yet," he whispered. "This is reconnaissance before the storm." And silence fell again, but now it breathed the explosive phosphorus of future revelations. A subtle feeling known to the military as intuition is dead, a premonition of an ambush, returned to Thomas exactly at the moment when he saw a familiar name in the leaked transfer sheet. The file was sent by Vince Marconi without further comment. Download from the Southern Pioneer Bank. Recipient Clearage Logistics, payer HealthPro Consulting. But the most pressing was the destination field. RX Cargo, driver J. Holt 4 times in the last 6 months. Jack Holt, a lively, charming medic who laughed in the Weller house and kissed Emma's hand before bed. The payments coincided with shipments of the very same experimental immunomodulators that Rowley was conducting under the FDA's radar. Thomas felt the cold and the burning collide beneath his solar plexus, as if he had swallowed a splintered blade. To make sure, he pulled up the GPS logs of Jack's pickup and compared them with Karen's airline tickets. The picture was eerily symmetrical. On the days when Rowley booked double for business rooms, Jack would leave the suburbs at night and hang out at rail 18 of the airport warehouse. 111 minutes of waiting, then 20 kilometers on the highway to a clinic that HealthPro insured as a logistics hub. The Wolf is not a random encounter, Thomas flashed. Wolf Wingman. He was still hoping for a data error until he heard audio from the Lakeview parking lot. In the recording, the voices were quiet, muffled, but the key phrases came out clearly. Rowley, tell Holt not to talk too much. His task is to pick up the cargo and take it to the Bay Point. All. He will receive the money in a week. Karen, he is young but reliable, and Emma won't have any questions. Rowley, that's great. The less the daughter knows, the calmer the father lives. The father cut Thomas more than any direct threat. This is how Rowley spoke of him, knowing that he was only a shadow behind his daughter's back. Puppeteer, pulling the strings of 2 puppets at once, Jack and Karen, and in the middle is Emma, the golden apple of trust. In the evening, Thomas invited Jack to a short medical conversation under the pretext of a first aid project for cadets. We sat in an empty auditorium. The fluorescent light cast pale geometric shadows. Thomas asked simple clinical cases: stroke, pneumothorax, anaphylaxis. Jack answered correctly, but without a spark of real practice. In one case, he mixed up the dose of epinephrine for an adult and a teenager. "You are sure?" Thomas said softly. "Sorry, I'm tired." Jack coughed and looked at his watch. At that moment, Thomas realized there really is no license. The rescuer's uniform is a screen needed to remove medical cargo without raising questions from the police. After Jack left, he sat in silence for a long time, squeezing his pen until it almost burst. According to the schedule, Emma was supposed to return by midnight. Jack was picking her up after a quiz evening at the student pub. Thomas imagined how the same hands that held the carbine during the exercise were squeezing the steering wheel of a car loaded with a gray farming container, how the same smile hugs his daughter. At the whiteboard in his office, Thomas replaced the blue pin with JH to red. Now all the lines converge at one point. David Rowley. A lamp burned dimly above the circuit, and the air was thick with the dust of cardboard folders. He heard his own breathing and beating in his temples. If I open Emma's eyes now, her world will collapse. If I wait, it will collapse later, but perhaps I will save her physically. The 2 scenarios flashed by like an alternation of frames. In the first, there are tears, betrayal, cut-up wedding plans. In the second, a potential shot somewhere on the highway when a van with cargo goes the wrong way. Thomas remembered a 20-year-old cadet from Afghanistan who learned about the death of her brother through a Facebook feed. The girl was shaking. She went into a psychological tailspin and could no longer hold a weapon. Emma is just as fragile at heart, no matter how much courage she puts on top. Her laughter was heard from behind the closed door. She was talking on the phone on the veranda. Thomas caught the words through the loose frames. "I know that Dad is strict, but he is good. He's just protective. Protects echoed in my chest. But how to protect without giving in to rage? Late that night, he downloaded a fresh batch of GPS coordinates. Jack's pickup truck was parked in a private lot next to the house. Everything is fine, and yet every green marker on the map now seemed like a blot of poison. He closed his laptop and walked into the kitchen. Hands themselves reached out to the old flask on the top shelf rare, front-line adhesive tape. Thomas brought the bottle to his lips, but the smell of alcohol suddenly sobered him up. He put the flask back. Alcohol dulls logic, and logic is its last bayonet. A sealed envelope folder remained in the living room. Checks, statements, photographs, audio transcripts. Enough to destroy both Rolly and Jack. Enough to break Karen and Emma. He sat down in front of the folder, as if in front of a cocked detonator. The minutes passed. The clock hand clicked louder than ever. Say it, and the pain will be immediate. Keep silent, and the wound may become fatal, two voices argued inside. The silence was broken by a barely audible knock. Emma looked into the darkness. "Dad, are you still awake?" Thomas looked up. In the round moon of the lamp, her face seemed childish. He felt his heart tearing through his ribs, trying to tell everything at once how the soldiers scream when the enemy approaches the trench. But the tongue became a stone. "Work papers, kitten," he answered, trying to smile. "Go, rest." "You too, rest," she whispered and closed the door. When her footsteps died down, Thomas covered the folder with his palm. The paper was cold, like metal. Far beyond the walls of the house, the world went on with its stock exchange reports and the whistle of the wind in the chimneys. Inside, Officer Weller was making a decision that they don't teach you to make in tactics courses, when to tell the truth to the one you love more than yourself. He got up and hid the folder in the safe, but left the key in the keyhole. He sat down on the edge of the sofa and remained there a statue of anxiety, looking into the darkness. At dawn, the house will plunge into a normal morning. Coffee, toast, crumbly jokes. But until the alarm clock rang, Thomas looked into the closed safe as if into a black opening, like a miner standing at a rock blast and not daring to press the button. An inner voice whispered, "A lie can save a second, but the truth saves a life." Another voice answered, "But the truth can tear this life apart." There was no answer, only the sickening taste of metal in my mouth and a dull pulse under the scar on my chest. And there, in the pensive shadow, Officer Weller realized the choice was not between truth and lies, but between an instant blow and a protracted siege. He exhaled slowly, as if he was releasing residual gunpowder smoke from his lungs, and waited for the first timid light through the blinds. The solution did not yet exist, but the world was already demanding it. On Saturday morning, the house woke up earlier than usual. The May light crept through the cracks of the blinds, cutting through the kitchen with thin blades, and in these blades it seemed to Karen as if there was flickering dust hanging in the air, too much of it for the carefully tidied space. She was probably just tired. Flights, meetings, a barrage of statistics slides in front of her eyes. Still alarmed. A crappy little thing that gets caught under your fingernails. She closed the dishwasher and touched the smooth steel door as if she were touching the cool forehead of a child whose temperature needed to be checked. No fever, but why does everything smell? Too clean. It's as if someone at midnight wiped not only the tabletops, but also their own marks. Thomas came down quietly, without an army-heavy step, in his home academy t-shirt. He looked rested or pretended to be. In recent weeks, he has learned to hold his face so straight that even the wrinkle on the bridge of his nose has smoothed out. Karen noticed this first thing even before the fresh milk in the coffee pot. "Were you asleep?" he asked, pouring water into the Turk. "Almost," she answered and sat down on the bar stool, cupping her cup with her hands. Her wrist seemed to tremble, but Thomas didn't look at her. He poured coffee, controlling every gram, as if he was planting an explosive. "How long have you been on your feet?" "Since 5. "Habit," he said without looking back. He no longer looked straight. Karen felt it on her skin, like a weak current under the fabric. His wife's face has become a shadow zone for him, which he looks around, but does not take into the center of his sight. They had two shadows near the slab, and both shadows moved away from each other, as if they were afraid of contact. Karen took a sip and caught her reflection in the glass of the oven. A strand of hair had fallen out. Her eyes were inflamed, but there was no makeup under her eyes. She forgot to put on makeup. Not a common occurrence. Usually her face comes out in full armor by morning. This time there is a gap. The Turk gurgled. Thomas removed the foam and slowly poured the coffee into small cups, in the same order as before when they first got married. Cinnamon for her, black for himself. An unbreakable ritual that suddenly became suspiciously precise. Karen thought, does he remember that I haven't liked cinnamon for a long time? I wanted to say it, but I restrained myself. Let there be cinnamon, it's at least something solid. Is Emma still sleeping? He asked, taking a sip. No, said Karen, and almost simultaneously the door upstairs creaked. The daughter ran down the stairs barefoot, in pajamas, and with a phone in her hand, her eyes glowing with the news that had overwhelmed her since midnight. Good morning, she sang, hugged her mother, and kissed her father on the cheek. Thomas wiped the spot where the coffee drop remained with his palm and smiled. Only Karen noticed that the smile lingered a moment longer, as if he was pushing every emotion through an internal customs checkpoint. Guess what? Emma jumped. Jack said that he would come with a special surprise today, and he asked me to shine all over. Does this by any chance mean what I think it means? Karen felt the cup in Thomas's hand shake. He placed it on the table a little louder than necessary, but his palms did not shake, he was too trained. He smiled at his daughter softly. A surprise is a surprise. Do not rush to conclusions. Dad, come on. Emma clasped her hands. You don't mind if... Well, you understand. Karen heard him take a calm breath. The lungs worked like a muffler. He looked at his wife briefly, but sharper than a blade, and quickly looked away. Let the surprise happen first, he said, and then we will talk about the against. Emma shrugged, but the happiness did not leave her face. She took a bite of dry toast, absent-mindedly reached for the phone, and then Karen noticed. Thomas usually doesn't like it when his daughter eats with a gadget. He made a remark earlier. Today I said nothing. Karen stood up slowly and went to get a second bag of coffee, an extra movement to think about. In recent days, the silence between her and Thomas had become ringing, like a strained garrote. In the evening, he would linger in the office, and when she looked in, the laptop would immediately close. One night I was passing by and heard the click of the safe. It was 3:20. She stopped in the corridor, but did not enter. She did not have the courage. In the darkness, the house seemed like a bowl where undissolved sugar was boiling sticky, sweet, and the caramel was about to darken. In the kitchen, Emma was chatting about the new collection of engagement rings on Pinterest and laughing like a little girl. Thomas listened, asking his daughter questions, but Karen felt his every remark, like the sound of a scalpel on glass, carefully so as not to break. He played the role of a caring father, but something about him was wary. It's as if he doesn't have keys in his pocket, but a detonator that can be triggered by a loud word. Karen took out the second packet of coffee, but her fingers were shaking. She almost tore the foil. Thomas glanced briefly just for a second, but there was a question in it. She turned to the window and saw her reflection in the glass, eyes in her eyes, a bend in her lips. A feeling emerged in her chest that someone was gently erasing and rewriting her picture of life. A few days ago, she returned from Houston and suddenly noticed that she had to enter the passwords for her email account twice, as if someone had tried and knocked down the counter. And it's also strange. The rubber seal on the bottom of the suitcase is peeling off as if it had been tampered with. Emma ran upstairs to call a friend, leaving the family leaders in the kitchen with cold coffee. Thomas stood with his back to her, carefully leafing through the newspaper, but Karen knew that he was not peering at the text. He's waiting it out. She caught her gaze and lowered her hands. Tom, are you going to the academy today? Always on Saturdays. The cadets don't accept rest, he said, without looking up from the newspaper. Have you changed the password on our Family Cloud folder? She asked as calmly as possible. The newspaper stopped and slowly lowered itself. A small light flashed in his eyes, like a flash during an optics test. No surprise, but rather verification. "No," he answered. "Maybe the session's deadline has just expired." Strange. The documents did not open. Karen took a sip, keeping her gaze level. "And also, did you happen to access my presentation files?" A new draft appeared there instead of the old one. "I can barely figure out how to open your biochemical graphs," he sighed. "Are you sure you didn't rename it yourself?" She looked straight, trying to catch the trembling in his voice, but he was calm. Only the corner of the lips is tense. He either told the truth or he lied for a very long time and learned. Her heart began to jolt, noisily, and she felt a punch in her throat. "Probably myself," she said. "Happens." He nodded and returned to the newspaper, but the word "happens" seemed to hang in the air and cover them both with a thin, sticky film. Karen realized that he knew something, and Thomas realized she felt something. Under everyone's skin, single radio transmitters vibrated, through which only one signal was transmitted: danger. She went into the living room under the guise of working on a report. On the way, I checked my bag. The phone was there, but the screen in the history showed strange hours of activity for the last few days. She didn't open her messenger until 3 in the morning, and I didn't access the corporate reporting server from home. The server was marked yesterday 2:12. Her legs went cold. Who climbed? House? Thomas? Hacking? Stupid, the password is complex. But if physical access... In Thomas's office, the window was slightly open. He stood in front of a map of the academic site, and on the table was a stack of lecture notes 3 times thick. He twirled the red marker paste on his fingertips. Karen watched through the crack of the door as he made dots, lines, arrows, as if he was planning a maneuver. The papers resembled a city map, but the street names were replaced with lame descriptions. T-Point, DR, JH. She couldn't make out the details, but the letter J swam in the center like a fish in an aquarium. When Thomas felt the gaze, he slowly turned his head. Eyes met, but no one disappeared. Karen put on a smile. "I gave you a new running route. Look later." "Of course," he answered evenly. A cheerful slamming of a closet door was heard from above. Emma was choosing a dress for a surprise. Karen retreated into the corridor, closing the office behind her, and her heart was pounding in her temples. Tom knows everything, or knows something, perhaps more than she's afraid to imagine. But what exactly, and why is he silent? When a man is silent, it means he has a trump card up his sleeve. And in Thomas's hand there was a marker red, extremely correct, as if he had already drawn a line between friends and enemies. In the afternoon, Jack arrived wearing a new light suit. A pickup truck, familiar but shiny, cleaned as if it were someone else's. Thomas was the first to step onto the porch. Karen watched from behind the curtain. There was a warm smile on the husband's face, but his shoulders were rigid. Jack extended his hand. Thomas shook it. 2 seconds of a handshake, and only they knew what was happening at the muscle level. Jack brought a souffle cake in a box. He spoke loudly and literally burst out with jokes. Emma spun like a comet, not noticing the stone course of events. Karen came out to the guests, allowed them to kiss her on the cheek, and asked about the route. Everyone behaved perfectly, but they moved as if on puppet strings. "We'd like to have a little picnic by the pier," Jack said. "Emma loves that pier." And in the evening, a surprise. Thomas looked at his daughter. There was so much tenderness in his eyes that Karen was scared for a second. It's too dangerous to pretend emotions, but he managed. "Pierce is a wonderful topic. Be careful with the waves. The wind will pick up after lunch." "Dad, I'm 23, Emma laughed, "but thank you for your concern." Karen felt a spring inside her. If Thomas knows about her meetings, about hotel rooms, why is he silent? To gain evidence? But against whom? Against her, or against Rolly and Jack? Tied up. No wonder Thomas suddenly began training him to shoot. She examined her daughter's man, his cuff, the dent in his collar, little things that she had not noticed before. It seemed to her that he was nervous. His smile was wider than usual. and he took a quick breath between sentences. This happens to people who are preparing for an important step or an important lie. While the young couple were collecting the basket, Karen approached Thomas at the door. The words could have fallen long ago, but they stood too close to the abyss. "Are you letting them go?" she asked, looking from him to Jack's truck. "Of course," said Thomas. "Why not?" She nodded, and at that moment I realized, if I ask one more question, the ice will crack. Thomas kept his face level with the neutral curtain, but his eyes were like a chink in armor. Through them he could see the volcano. Emma burst out, grabbed the groom's hand, and pulled him to the car. Karen pretended to be a smiling mother and waved a napkin. "Don't forget your sunscreen." The car jerked off the gravel. Thomas watched until the dust settled. There were 3 people left on the path in front of the house: Thomas, Karen, and a long shadow of unspoken words. He turned to her as if he wanted to ask something mundane, but he held back. The movement of his hand was as if he wanted to take her palm and stopped a centimeter away. Karen felt the cold on her fingertips. "We need to talk," she said too quietly. She was surprised that she said it. "Let's talk," he responded. "Not today." "Why not today?" Thomas looked toward the horizon where the pickup truck had disappeared. "Because today is their day." He paused. "And because I haven't understood everything yet." She restrained her lips from trembling. "He chose the position of a scout, not a husband, and she is among the suspects. But she also felt the surveillance, she also collected the pieces. I just wasn't sure how to fit them into the picture." He took the keys to the safe from his pocket and squeezed them so hard that the metallic sound clinked menacingly in the silence. Karen didn't ask what was in the safe. "Haven't asked yet." The door slammed quietly from behind. The wind. They shuddered at the same time. 2 fighters who stand back to back, but do not know if they are each other's enemies. The tension in the air was like hot wire. It was clear that no one was controlling the puppets blindly anymore. But no one is ready to be the first to cut the strings. In the evening, when the May heat had passed, Karen sat on the veranda, looking at the phone. She held her finger over the name D. Rowley, but couldn't press it. If Thomas is eavesdropping, every phrase will become evidence. She lowered her hand. In the garden, fireflies flashed like jewelry dots. The silence became monumental, like a wall between 2 cemeteries. Karen slammed her laptop shut and slowly walked up to the house. 1 lamp was burning inside, and under it Thomas was writing something in a notebook. When she entered, he did not raise his head, but stopped writing. She walked past and pressed the kettle button as long as there was sound. The hot spiral hissed, and in this sound Karen heard her own heart beating for the first time in a long time. Smoothly, stubbornly, fighting off the thought with every drop of boiling water. There are 2 of us in this game, but who holds the dolls? The answer hung in the air and threatened to collapse like a chandelier if someone slammed the door too loudly. The ashen sunset flowed over the horizon as candles began to be lit in the Weller house. Emma spent the whole day whispering with her friends, preparing an outfit and a playlist, while Thomas, meanwhile, changed the lamps in an old army projector. It smelled of heated resin and years of archival dust. The living room sparkled, a snow-white tablecloth, 2 rows of cutlery, and in the center a 3-tiered cake with fragile sugar anemones. Karen was arranging glasses, counting forks, rearranging napkins, but her eyes kept sliding to the video wall hidden by velvet curtains. A few days ago, Thomas announced that he had prepared a multimedia surprise for his daughter, and since then, a tense anticipation hung over the room, like the smell of a thunderstorm before it rumbled. At exactly 7, the door slammed. 2 lilac hydrangeas in hands Jack Holt. The suit fit perfectly, only the collar chafed slightly. He often touched it with his fingers, like a soldier unsure of someone else's uniform. Garland lights floated on both sides of the corridor. In their soft light, Jack looked like a movie groom, but there was a quick current in the pupils, a shot of adrenaline that only the blind would not notice. Emma descended the stairs like a ray of mother-of-pearl, and as soon as she saw these flowers, she flashed a smile, as if someone had turned on a festive lantern from inside. She hugged Jack and Thomas, standing at the sideboard, watched as the young man's palm lingered for a second at his daughter's waist, a little tighter than it should be in front of parents. The military man noted the gesture and put away in his memory how a medic puts a tourniquet on a wound. Karen came out with a bottle of champagne, sparkling drops running down the glass. She still felt invisible eyes, as if the walls were listening to her steps. Thomas nodded and ordered everyone to the table. There was honey in the voice, but underneath it one could discern steel, the same one that soldiers hear before formation. The toasts began as usual. Karen wished her daughter more than she dreamed of. Jack, having sipped his wine, stood up and pulled out a narrow box from his inner pocket. The silvery glare from the lid passed along the wall like a sunbeam. Thomas tilted his head slightly. The silence stretched. Jack began, "On this day I want to." Karen coughed as if by accident, and Thomas raised his hand to stop the young man. "Give me a minute, Guy," he said softly and handed over the remote control for the projector. Before the main surprise, let father have his say. Jack closed the box and put it in his pocket, pretending that he had not burst into flames. Emma widened her eyes, thinking that Dad had collected school photos. She clapped her hands and laughed, although the laughter betrayed a nervous undertone. In recent weeks, she had felt all too clearly the undercurrent between her parents. The curtains parted. The title frame flashed on the wall. "For my daughter on the day she became an adult." White text on a dark blue background. It looked harmless, and Emma pressed her hand to her chest. The first slide is photographs of her childhood. Diapers, a red puppy, a blurry shot of cycling training. The hall was filled with light sighs. Jack exhaled in relief. Thomas commented, warmly, with a smile, "This is our first fishing trip, and here you sprained your finger but didn't cry." Emma beamed, and Karen watched intently as he held the remote control. His fingertips turned white, as if holding back an unpleasant underground pressure. Seventh slide. The memories are over. The canvas turned gray and had GPS coordinates and a date engraved on it. Photo of the Lakeview Hotel parking lot. There is a timestamp in the corner. An enlarged frame flickered. A woman in a gray jacket, a man with a leather briefcase. They walk out the front door, and although their faces are out of focus, the silhouettes of Karen and Rolly are recognizable. The glasses clinked. Karen leaned forward slightly, her breath hitching. Emma turned to her mother, but she was already looking at her husband. A shadow of confused defiance crossed Karen's face, a mixture of fear and pride. "Dad," Emma whispered, "what's going on?" "I'll show you only the facts, kitten," said Thomas, without raising his voice. "I'm sorry it's your day, but an honest gift is better than a brilliant lie." Next frame, screen copy of a bank transfer. The payer is HealthPro Consulting, the recipient is Clearidge Logistics. Assigned to RX Cargo, driver J. Holt. Jack turned pale. The hand darted to the box in his pocket, as if looking for a weapon. His gaze flickered to Karen, then to Thomas. Emma slowly turned to her groom. "Jack?" She barely moved her lips. "What does it mean?" Thomas did not give an answer. Behind him, on the side table, lay a folder. He picked it up, opened it like a folder with genuine orders, and a series of audiograms appeared in the projector. Waves of sound and signatures filtered phrases, dates, SIM numbers. The speaker brought out Rolly's muffled voice, "Tell Holt not to talk too much." And Karen's answer, "He's young, but reliable." Thomas pressed pause before Emma's name was mentioned, but the meaning had already hit the room like spilled acid. Tables, flowers, candles, everything lost focus. Emma's breathing became harsh. She rose to her feet like a person whose earth had suddenly begun to spin. Her voice broke. "Mom? Jack?" Karen looked straight at her husband, as if he were looking at the sights of a tank. There was a mixture of resentment and disapproved pain in her eyes, not for herself, but for her daughter. Her lips trembled twice before meeting the wall of silence. Thomas put the remote control on the table. "I wanted," he said quietly, "not to have a single shadow on this table today." He gestured to the screen, but didn't change the frame. The last phrase froze in the photo. "I love such business trips." Behind it is the blackness of a pause. Thomas turned off the projector. The room plunged into twilight. The candles began to seem like a cardiogram. The heartbeat of the fire trembled. Thomas approached his daughter and wanted to put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support, fellowship, but Emma pulled back and, rather with an automatic movement, stepped towards her mother. Karen moved towards her, but they both stopped. A question hung between them, heavy as a concrete slab. "Who are you to me now?" Jack stood up, his voice breaking into a broken whisper. "Emma, please let me explain." The answer is silence. She looked at him, at his suit, at the cake icing that reflected the candlelight, and her eyes were filled not with anger, but with a slowly advancing horror, like water rising in an elevator shaft. Thomas placed the folder on the edge of the table, like a military man placing the last box of mines in front of an engineering group. He looked up at Karen. Their eyes met, and there was no victory in that look, only the heavy weariness of a man who had sent out a distress signal, but was not sure who would drown first. The candles fluttered. Faces were reflected in the windows, and it seemed as if behind the glass were the ghosts of all the words they had not said to each other over the years. The cake glistened sadly, alien to itself. The garlands were blinking, and on the floor, next to the chair, a closed case with a ring lay quietly, a gift that no longer had any meaning. And no one else moved. At that moment, the aching scar between them was completely exposed, and every speck of dust in the air seemed to scream. Emma's birthday became the day when the supports crumbled, and while the shadows trembled on the walls, no one knew which word would break first and in which direction the darkness would pour. It was as if an invisible shell had exploded in the living room. The silence that had hung after the revealing slides cracked, and in its fragments, Emma inhaled air so sharply that the sound resembled a dying sob. She found it difficult to find support in the chair leg. Her eyes lost focus. The walls swam, faces seemed to blur in watercolors. Only Jack was visible whole, real, standing in step, but completely alien. He began, his voice trembling like a string in the wind. "Everything is not as your father shows." "Wrong?" she snapped, the feeling burning like bitter smoke in her throat. "Your signature is there, Jack, and Mom's name. How can it be wrong?" He took a step and wanted to touch her hand, but Emma pulled away as if from fire. Karen, pale as the gloss of a cake, rushed towards her daughter, but Thomas confidently caught her gaze and wordlessly ordered, "Stop." His face is granite, his eyes have steel reflections, like in the tube of a long-range sight. Karen's words were stuck halfway. Her lips opened, but her voice did not come out. Jack turned to Thomas, his face like glass about to crack before being hit. "Sir, look, I loved Emma. I love it. I really wanted to do it right." Thomas stood straight, arms at his sides, as if on a military parade ground, but his jaw moved jerkily. The house smelled of paraffin, and something burnt the smell of a tearing future. "You were going to be part of the family," he said quietly, too quietly, "and all this time you were part of someone else's scheme." "This is business, sir," Jack breathed, desperately searching for excuses. "Supply of humanitarian drugs, nothing criminal." Thomas's laugh was as dry as a blank shot. "Humanitarian, with fake licenses, with a premium from predators. Get out while I see you only as a scoundrel, not as an enemy." Jack remembered the box with the ring lying on the tablecloth. The shine of silver still beckoned, threatening to become a hoop. He wanted to take it, but his hand trembled. It was too heavy to touch something that had already turned into a reproach. He raised his eyes to Emma. She stood with molten tears and seemed to have suddenly disappeared from the present, like a doll whose frame had been pulled out. "Emma," he said in a whisper, "I'm sorry." She didn't answer. Only the lips trembled, as if they wanted to ask, "Why?" But the tongue grew stiff. Jack retreated, backing away, almost knocked over his glass, and burned his fingers on the candle. Thomas did not move. He stood like a motionless guard, but with his eyes he ordered, "Step beyond the threshold." Karen looked at her daughter's back, not daring to approach, as if she was afraid that one touch would break her scream. The door slammed. Jack's steps hit the gravel painfully and were drowned in the evening echo. It seemed as if the world outside had exhaled. Another link in the chain had broken. Inside, the lights of the garland flickered and went out a short circuit, as if the wiring could not withstand the voltage. The living room was filled with almost complete darkness for a second. Only the candles continued to flicker with red flames. Karen was the first to cross the line of silence. She grabbed Thomas's hand, her nails cutting into his skin. "Tom, you wanted the truth, you got it. Let me explain. Everything was more complicated. David, it was a mistake, but also a business, a forced step, a project that—" "Projects," he repeated, as if tasting the word, "are made on the negotiating table, and not in bed." Her fingers trembled. The businesswoman's protective armor was cracking. "It started because of research." She spoke quickly, her voice trembling at first, then picking up pace, saving herself with facts. "Our department was stalled. We needed funding. David offered hidden quotas. I thought. We thought we could speed up the registration, bring the drug to compassionate use. I thought I was in control of the situation, Tom. It was a cold calculation, yes, but—" "But you decided that I wouldn't understand," he interrupted. "You both decided that I was superfluous." He pulled her hand away, as if cutting off the connection. Karen stepped closer to Emma. Her daughter collapsed in a chair, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking in sobs. Thomas looked at them and felt a vice squeezing his chest. Love for his daughter beat under his ribs, but the leaden cover of betrayal pressed on top. Emma raised her head. The eyes are inflamed, the eyelashes are stuck together from tears. "Mom," she gasped, "tell me it's something other than a lie, that you're not. Please." Karen knelt down and clasped her daughter's hands. "Baby," she whispered, "I didn't want to involve you. Jack and I—" David asked for the deliveries to appear legal. A clean driver with a medical background was needed. I didn't think getting engaged would be part of the game. He was convinced that everything would be safe. Emma pushed her hands away. "You used me? Hi?" The voice broke into a howl. Was this the plan? Karen tried to touch again, but Emma, huddled against the back of the chair, put her hands behind her head, as if hiding from a blow. "I'm sorry," Karen whispered, and, realizing that the touch was now poisonous, she sank to the floor like a sinful nun. Thomas stood a few steps away from them, like an island cut off by the tide. It was as if he saw the scene outside and could not intervene. Heavy breathing, arms down, blood pounding in his ears. His life, everything that he had collected stone by stone, thought through, saved, was now turning into ruins, and blocks of stone fell with dull blows to his chest. Emma jumped up, staggering, ran towards the stairs, her dress caught on the edge of the carpet. She almost fell. Karen rushed after her, but Thomas raised his hand. Enough. The daughter disappeared upstairs and slammed the door. A second later, a muffled sob was heard, a sound that pierced the crown. Only the two of them remained in the living room. Karen stood up slowly. Her face was bathed in the warm light of the candles, an illusion of calm. In fact, the skin turned gray, the eyes darkened. She tried to find her voice, but the words were stuck on her breath. Thomas didn't give her a chance. "I'm leaving," he said quietly. She shook her head as if she had been slapped. "Where?" "Where I can think," he answered. "There's no air for thoughts here." Karen took half a step. "Tom, please, not today. Let's at least wait until she—" The voice broke. "You see, she needs us too." He sighed. And in this sigh, there was so much fatigue that could not fit in the chest of one person. "She needs at least one adult to tell the truth," he said. "And while I'm here, I don't know how not to scream." His car key was on the sideboard. Thomas only took the key and wallet. I left the folder with the evidence there, smiling at the candle flames, as if he said, "Evidence is no longer needed, everything has been said." He paused for a second at the stairs and looked up. Behind the closed door, his daughter's sobs became quieter, turning into intermittent whispers. He wanted to get up, but realized every word from his lips would now crush her more than silence. Karen stood between him and the exit, not a barricade, more like a last post. Her eyes sparkled, A thin tear ran down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. Thomas looked straight. "Perhaps I'll come back tomorrow to talk," he said, "but today I'll lose myself if I stay." Karen nodded and let go. I tried to say, "I love you," but my throat tightened. He walked past, smelling of his cologne, a mixture of cedar and vetiver, a scent she had lived with for half her life. The smell disappeared behind the door. A minute later, the car slammed, the engine roared, the headlights crossed the window and slid across the ceiling, leaving the house in wavering candlelight. In the empty living room, the clock ticked louder than the heart. Karen sank into a chair and covered her face with her hands. The birthday cake stood untouched. The candles were bent over. Hot wax dripped onto the icing like the tears of the room itself. The evening dress yearned like someone else's skin, and in the corridor lay the ring case, abandoned before Jack left. The silver inside had dimmed like the moon behind the clouds. Upstairs, the bathroom slammed shut. Emma must have turned on the water, trying to drown her tears in the noise of the faucet. Karen stood up but didn't go. There was no strength left to move towards her daughter. Her feet had grown into the carpet. All that remained was silence, viscous, sticky, like resin, and the sound of paraffin drops. All roles were assigned without a script. Wife traitor, daughter victim, husband deserter. A family built on discipline and control turned out to be fragile, like a thin-walled flask. One pressure and the glass sings, cracks, and crumbles into crumbs. Karen stood up and went to the window. It was getting dark in the yard. The bushes seemed like black shadows. Thomas's headlights were not visible. He had left. For the first time in many years, the house seemed to her like a stronghold abandoned by a garrison. Someone's shadows danced on the walls, phantoms of happiness, which they once filmed on the family camera. And now these shots were worth nothing. She walked past the table to the stairs, rose slowly, paused on the landing, listening. A faint wheezing was coming from Emma's room, more like a helpless dream of heartbeats. Karen pressed her forehead to the door and wrapped her palms around the frame, as if she wanted to merge with the wall and convey warmth to her daughter without going inside. But inside, Emma was alone. The clock struck 10. The candles were burning out the last millimeters. Karen came down and extinguished them with 3 smooth strokes. The room was plunged into twilight darkness. Only light from a distant lantern barely leaked from the street. In this weak, uneven light, she saw a folder on the sideboard. Slowly, she approached and touched the back of her hand. The knowledge hidden inside cut my fingers, even through cardboard. Karen took the folder, pressed it to her chest, and walked into Thomas's office. There, under the dim table lamp, the red marker on the diagram was still burning. She opened the safe and returned the folder there. Slamming the door, she closed her eyes, and for the first time all evening allowed the tears to flow freely. Behind the iron of the safe, it was not the archive of evidence that trembled. What connected them was trembling. Trust, love, memory. Everything was under a combination lock, and the combination was lost. The house is tired of breathing. There were only 2 women left in it, one broken, the other guilty. Their heartbeats echoed emptily, and they both knew. Tomorrow, when the morning light rose, the walls would still be standing, but the family would not. Thomas took with him the last connecting thread, and now the house seemed like a museum hall from which visitors had left, leaving the exhibits to the parched guards. The ash-pink sugar flower slowly slid down the cake, losing its petals. Karen watched them fall and understood. This was the picture of the evening beauty, cooked from a sweet solution, melting from its own heat. Thomas returned to the empty house after midnight, when the candles had already melted and the cake in the living room smelled of baked sweet peel. He did not turn on the light, sat in the dark in the middle of the flight of stairs, and listened to the house breathe with emptiness. Someone else's heart still burned in his chest, someone else's, because he left his own in the same box where he put away the evidence. All that survived was the old military instinct. If the defense collapses, set up a new line, strengthen yourself, strike back. In the morning, he went to see retired Colonel Norris, a bark-faced old man who sat on the Defense Supply Review Board. Norris was deeply indifferent to the family soap, but he hated any dark schemes of pharmaceutical contracts in Afghanistan. His people were poisoned with counterfeit morphine, and the colonel wore this resentment like a scar. Thomas laid it all out dryly: a pharmaceutical company, an illegal drug channel, a corporate treasury where millions are buried. He didn't talk about marriage or lovers, just about the false humanitarian label, evading the FDA and threatening the nation's medical reserves. Norris listened without a single emotion, and then said, "The paper is needed to fill the cannon. Bring it and we'll shoot." Thomas had the paper. The folder, locked in the safe, contained all the coordinates, receipts, and call transcripts. He sorted the files, removed personal matters, and left only clear points of illegal deliveries. On the cover I wrote in red marker, "RX Gate." 12 hours later, Norris turned on his channels: defense acquisition, intelligence supply, two old acquaintances at the FDA. The mechanism roared quietly, like a diesel engine in the mountains. First, they requested a copy of the documentation from HealthPro. Then they initiated a routine audit in Karen's department. For the sake of appearance, they were checking the entire block of experimental drugs, but Thomas knew that when the auditors came, they would put on their table exactly those accounts that went through clearage accounts on which the name Karen Weller clearly loomed and the note Q3 Strategy, KW, and doctor only. Karen found out about the audit a week after the scandalous dinner. Thomas at this time was living in a motel on the highway, a cheap bed, a lamp with a buzzing neon, and a major's uniform in a case. He didn't answer her calls, but he kept an eye on the bulletins: an internal commission, suspended budgets, a tape of layoffs. By the end of the second week, a new word had formed around David Rowley, financial curator subject of investigation. Thomas was in no hurry. He knew that the steps must overlap each other like pavement slabs so that there are no gaps left under them. He met Vince Marconi at an old shooting range outside of town. The shots muffled the conversation. I took out an envelope with photographs: Rowley in the hotel, Rowley at the fitness reception, Rowley in the private lounge of the airport. Vince smiled with the grin of a digital hunter. "Your goods are already in the Finson Cyber cash register. Then their dining machines will find the circuit themselves." Thomas only responded, "Thank you, brother." 3 days later, Financial Intelligence sent an alert to SEC officers about suspicious activity from HealthPro Clearage. For Rowley, it worked like dynamite under a boat. Accounts were frozen, passports were marked. The personal lawyer tried to negotiate, but when it emerged that the deliveries were carried out under the designation Military Medical Humanitarian Corridor, the military prosecutor's office became involved. David Rowley emerged from his glass office in the early morning, preparing to fly to Denver, and was asked to answer additional questions at the security screening area. Thomas didn't see the arrest, but he imagined: the plastic gloves of the officers, the coldness of the chair, the flash in his eyes when it became clear that it was all over. Karen stayed at the firm for another 10 days. She was called to the compliance department, a neat woman at a round table, 2 investigators with voice recorders. Karen hoped that she would be able to cut herself off from Rowley with the words "didn't know," substitution of reports, falsified signatures. But the electronic archive contained her own letters marked "not for revision." You can't forge signatures, you can't confuse your voice. The safe from which Thomas got the folder was closed, but a copy remained in the cloud. She was suspended for the duration of the proceedings, her access was blocked, and her laptop was taken away. The newspapers were not yet greedy with loud headlines, but the first leaks appeared in the narrow safari of the pharmaceutical business. The vice president of Northstar Pharma could be involved in a shadow supply scheme. When Thomas's phone rang, he was at the shooting range with the cadets. The voice with 202 said, "It's done." And he added, "We will take testimony from my wife if you wish to be present." Thomas replied, "No, I'm a private person." At home, Karen found an icy silence. The bedroom was empty. On the nightstand, there was a single piece of paper: the keys to the house, a receipt for the last month of communal services, a white bag with medical masks, which Thomas took from the academic first aid kit. The package looked like a mockery, and Karen realized It was a reminder that it all started with pharma, with masks, with false mercy. She called her daughter. Emma picked up the phone, but after the word baby, there was a long pause. In a dull, overly polite voice, Emma said that she had moved into a small apartment near campus and was looking for a job to pay the rent. When asked if help was needed, she answered quietly, "I have to figure it out myself." Karen tried to say that she loved her, but came up with a short, "I have to go." The conversation ended. Jack disappeared as if someone had taken a page out of a book. The number did not answer. The pickup truck was found in the parking lot of the Houston airport. The door was opened by customs officers, and inside there was only a sweater with the logo of rescuers. Thomas read the report without blinking. The shooting instructors saw how he placed 6 cartridges in a row at the firing range, fired 1 shot at a time. All 6 went into the center. He silently put the carbine in the rack and left without taking off his headphones. There was a rumor at the academy that Weller was irritated and melted after the divorce. The cadets tried not to fall under the hot hand, but Thomas was cold, almost emotionless. He completely redesigned the Leadership Under Pressure course. He removed the Team Trust slogan from the presentations and added a section on how the betrayal of an ally breaks the chain of command. Closer to autumn, Karen received an official notification. The SEC initiated a case of manipulation of reporting. That same day, the corporate board voted to fire her, with language excluding severance pay. The newspapers got the facts, and the promised rumble came. Pharma Queen caught in a shady scheme. The reports flashed a photograph of her smiling at a symposium, and under the frame the caption, "Under investigation." Thomas got into his old Charger every morning and drove to the ocean. He parked his car on a concrete pier and watched the waves lick the stones. In the glove compartment was a photograph of Emma in a fishing vest. He wanted to call, but every time he imagined how her elongated voice would sound through the receiver, in which, thanks to him, distrust of every adult settled. And he put down the phone. One evening after class, Norris called him. The old speaker wheezed. "Rowley will make a deal, hand over a chain of intermediaries. They need your signature on the data transfer protocol." Thomas paused. "Let him rent," he said. "I did mine. No longer a soldier." On Saturday night, Karen stood on the veranda of their empty house. Leaves were running along the porch. Through the glass you could see the living room, the same table, empty, without a tablecloth, a wooden surface with a pale stain from a candle. She held an envelope from the prosecutor's office, the date of the hearing, a list of charges. A car passed on the street, the headlights flickered, and Karen suddenly saw the reflection of Thomas in this light, not real, ghostly, like a closed gestalt. She wanted to call, but the number was on the blacklist. Emma, meanwhile, rented a room above the flower shop. I worked part-time in the library and did a course project. She stopped wearing the promise ring and put an old photo of Jack hugging her at the pier in her desk drawer. The phone sometimes showed an unknown call from a number with no name. She didn't take it. When her mother called, Emma would go to the bathroom, turn on the shower, and listen to the long beeps drowning in the sound of the water. Her classmates invited her to the bar, but she replied that she was tired. Thomas did not ask fate for a reward. He wanted silence, and he got it. His motel smelled of bleach and cinnamon from the coffee machine. At night, he woke up from a ringing in his ears. He seemed to hear Emma crying somewhere far away, and Karen whispering, "I'm sorry." He got up, washed his face with ice water, and repeated, "The intelligence operation is completed. The object has been neutralized." But in the morning mirror, I looked at myself and saw a tired soldier who experienced his own victory as a defeat. One day, the cadets found a new quote on the cathedral plaque. "Sometimes the hardest battle is to emerge from your own fortress after victory." Sign next to it, T. Weller. The cadets were puzzled by this, but they did not ask. They saw how the major began to often linger at the shooting range, leaving shell casings in neat triangles on the counter, like small tombstones. In a small apartment, Emma wrote her thesis on the bioethics of clinical trials. In the conflict of interest section, she left a blank line, looked at it for a long time, and typed the text. Sometimes a personal conflict destroys the very foundations of scientific truth. I wrote it and deleted it, replaced it with a drier phrase. Karen lived with a colleague she knew, walked around law offices, reread protocols, and tried to find a loophole that would return at least some of her reputation. Deep down, she understood that defeat was final, but the habit of fighting was stronger than common sense. During one of the interrogations, the investigator asked, whose initiative was it to implicate a driver with a fake license? Karen closed her eyes and remembered David laughing. It's decided. It will be beautiful. The main thing is to keep your husband halfway from the tank. And she answered, mine. Thomas did not follow the details of the process. He only received a short note from Vince. Weller Karen Art, 1354, possible transaction, suspended sentence of up to 3 years, ban on holding leadership positions. He placed the paper in the drawer where he kept his Silver Star medal and closed it. A year has passed since that memorable dinner. Late autumn came to the city. The leaves on the alleys were the color of bourbon. Thomas left the academy on Friday and walked to the abandoned pier where Emma once walked with Jack. The wind smelled of wet salt and old wood. He took out his phone and looked at his daughter's number. The finger froze. Then I pressed call. They didn't take it from the other side right away. The tube breathed for 3 seconds, then a cautious voice sounded, Dad. He closed his eyes, and everything he wanted to say fell out, but resulted in a simple, how are you? Emma replied, I'm alive. The pause was difficult, but not deadly. Thomas breathed in the humid air of the bay and suddenly realized something else could be built, even on a scorched field. They talked for 5 minutes about coursework, about the pursuit of housing, about the cold wind. Not a word about that night, not a word about my mother. But at the end, Emma said, I'm glad you called. And Thomas felt the steel inside had softened a little. He returned to the motel and lay down on the bed. The ocean raged outside the window. Dark waves beat against the stones with the same monotony as a year ago, when everything collapsed. Thomas looked at the ceiling and thought that victory without those for whom it was needed was simply a change in the landscape. He realized that he was left alone not because he left, but because it was impossible to live in a house that he himself had convinced to collapse. At night, he had a strange dream. An empty living room, candles burning, but no one came, and a sugar flower blooming back, collected from melting syrup into a whole bud. Thomas woke up and black water was flowing outside the window. He sat until dawn, until the first pale stripe touched the horizon. When morning came, the phone beeped briefly. A new message from Emma. He opened it and saw, Dad, let's meet on Sunday. I'll be at the pier at noon. No smiley face, no message, but it was an invitation, the first plank on the empty bridge pilings. Thomas exhaled slowly. He understood. Destroying lives turned out to be a matter of technology, but building anew was a matter of the heart. And after such a war, the heart beats slowly, carefully, like a scout in a minefield. However, its knocking can still be heard. And maybe this sound will be enough to one day light the candles at the empty table again, not for the sake of the trophy, but for the sake of warmth. The gray February haze was creeping outside the classroom windows, as if someone was slowly erasing the landscape. The classroom smelled of gun grease and fresh chalk. Thomas began his morning lecture with dismantling the standard M4 rifle, but always ended with what he called tactics of the heart. He believed, if a cadet does not understand why risk himself for the sake of someone else, no fire contact schemes will save him. Today, Cadet Adam Clark was sitting on the first desk, 20, thin face, too quick fire in his eyes. Everyone else went to the obstacle course, and he lingered with the question that novice officers stumble over. Sir, his voice trembled, but Clark straightened up. You said that trust between fighters is as important as a cartridge in the chamber. But what to do if the cartridge turns out to be blank? What if there is a traitor within the group? Thomas rested his hands on the pulpit. The board behind him was covered with diagrams, sector coverage, firing angles, but now he covered them with himself, as if he was hiding something unimportant. The blank cartridge still fires, Cadet. There is a roar, there is a flame, but it does not hit the target. Sometimes he even wounds his own when the gunpowder rushes back. The most difficult thing is to hear in time that the sound is a little louder than usual. Clark blinked, trying to comprehend the metaphor. Let's say we heard. The next step is to inform the commander or act immediately. Thomas recalled hearing more than usual in his own home 6 months ago and choosing actions that ruined everything. His cheeks felt a little tight, but he didn't let his voice waver. First you fix it. Not a rumor, not an emotion, but a fact. Without proof, you yourself will become single. But remember, while you are gathering the facts, the traitor can change the form of deception. Therefore, the steps should be quiet and fast like the shadow of a knife. The cadet perked up noticeably. The lecture turned into a confession, and it beckoned him like a secret code. What if your brother turns out to be a traitor? Friendship. Family. Thomas reached out to the window frame and opened the ventilation. The damp air burned his lungs. Pieces of the past flashed before my eyes, not footage of the scandal, but completely different, soft colors. Once, many years ago, in early spring, he carried 3-year-old Emma along the banks of the Potomac. The girl laughed, burying her face in his chevron, and demanded more higher. The city across the river flashed with lights, and Thomas thought that holding a baby's hand was easier than holding a grenade. He lowered Emma to the ground and showed her how a pebble jumped like a frog through the water. "Look, Dad, he's flying too," she screamed and ran for the next stone. Then he believed that someone had managed to tame the whole world so that it would be reflected in his daughter's brown eyes. A couple of years later, on a rainy birthday, Emma was building a blanket fort in the garden. Thomas joined in. He brought out the military tent rope and tied the corners so that the roof would not sag. The girl declared the fort a republic of trust and appointed him president and herself minister of laughter. They sat under the canopy, heard the drops drum on the fabric, and Thomas thought that if heaven had a shape, then it would be like a narrow, warm triangle of blankets and children's laughter. As Emma grew, each year felt like a new milestone. He taught her to balance on a bicycle, and she taught him to let go of the saddle. Was he studying then? A flash of autumn, a 16th birthday, lanterns, a dog wrapped in a scarf, which was supposed to be a surprise. Thomas held the puppy box while Karen distracted Emma. When the lid opened, the girl burst into tears not because of the gift, but because her dad remembered how much she wanted a dog. "Trust is remembering," she said at the time. He remembered. In the audience, Thomas blinked, turning back to the cadet. Adam was waiting for a formula that he could write down in his notebook. "It happens," Thomas said slowly, "that the traitor is the one to whom you entrusted the strongest parts of yourself. Then you don't separate the personal from the combat. Go and build a new defense, but don't waste extra ammunition on revenge. It rarely brings victory, but often leaves a desert." Clark nodded, but his gaze became more thoughtful. Doubt slipped through him, like the shadow of a cloud. "Sir, what if the desert has already arrived? If after the impact there are only craters around? How to trust again?" This question came unexpectedly. Thomas took a step towards the table, took the training carbine, checked the bolt, and returned it to its place. A familiar gesture, behind which it is easy to hide the trembling of his fingers. "Trust is not a contract, cadet," he said. "It cannot be signed forever. It is built anew every day, like a version of the operational map. Sometimes you build alone because the group has fled. The main thing is not to start looking at everyone through the lens. A sight is needed to shoot, not to live." Clark smiled and lifted his chin. "You personally were able to do it." Thomas looked out the windows. From outside, the fields of the academy seemed endless, but beyond them there was a world where Emma was studying to be a clinical researcher and sometimes answered his messages. Each rare meeting began with a long silence, but ended with coffee together. He saw Karen only in the court corridor, where she gave evidence and nodded to him wordlessly. Their view was desert, but without gunshots. David Rowley, now a figure in newspaper articles, he was facing prison time. Thomas felt a dull echo from the thought of him, like the wind in an empty bunker. Revenge turned out to be not a victory, but simply a point of instruction. "I'm working on it," he answered honestly. "Every day a little bit." Clark adjusted his watch strap and asked almost in a whisper, "Is there a chance that the person will improve after betrayal?" Thomas held his breath. An illustration flashed in his head. Tiny Emma, covered in dirt, comes to him with a broken knee. He washes the blood and applies a bandage. The girl asks, "Dad, now I won't be able to run." He replies, "You can, just let the wound heal." A week later, she is already competing with the boys in the yard. If there is blood, it means the heart is beating. "There's a chance," he said, "but the wound should close not from above, but from the inside. If a person tries to simply cover it with a band-aid, he will tear off the skin again." Clark stood up, buttoned his jacket, and saluted. "Thank you, sir." He smiled slightly. It seems the shot was blank, but the roar was heard. "I'll try to stay charged." When he left, Thomas was left in an empty classroom. The white chalk creaked under his fingers as he quietly wrote the word "trust" on the dark board. Then I wiped it with the edge of my palm so that no marks remained. He put away his pencils, turned off the light, and went out into the corridor, where the glass reflected his figure slightly stupid, but walking straight. On the parade ground, the cadets lined up in a box, and Clark stood in his place a little straighter than in the morning. Thomas stood at the railing, watching the steady rhythm of footsteps fill the area. One step, another step, and the echoes slowly replaced the silence. He thought that maybe this is how new trust is born, from many identical steps, when everyone hears their neighbor and matches their feet. The phone vibrated. Message from Emma. "Dad, remember when we played fort in the rain? I found that blanket. You were right, the fabric still holds water." Thomas smiled. The gates of the academy creaked. The wind blew damp air. He typed the answer. "Every fort can be repaired, Minister of Laughter." He whispered the last word out loud and hid the phone. Outside, the gray day seemed endless, but somewhere behind the clouds lurked spring. Thomas took a deep breath. The gunpowder smoke of the combat course mingled with the chalk and damp wind, a strange but vibrant aroma. For a moment he felt little Emma's hand in his again and heard her laugh rattling under the fabric of the tent. This sound came through the years like an echo of an explosion, but without pain. He walked down the corridor, satisfied that there was still work to do, and there were cadets for whom it was important to hear how to distinguish a real shot from a blank one. And behind the door of the academy, an evening awaits on which you can write a second message to your daughter. After all, trust is built anew step by step, word by word, like a patrol through a minefield, until one day the gray day ends and the first point of light appears. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.